Today, the story of one of the region's quiet heroes, and his deeds performed in some of the worst conditions imaginable, the Western Front of the First World War. A man who, by today's standards, had a relatively short life, although far longer than many of his comrades in uniform ever had. He would serve in two different branches of the armed forces and stand by his country in two world wars. Arthur Frederick Saunders was born somewhere between the 22nd and the 24th of April 1878, although some sources I am seeing say 1879, in Call Road in the St John's parish of Ipswich, to Thomas and Anne Saunders. His father was a saddle and harness maker by trade for the Henry Finn firm, one of those widespread careers that has now all but disappeared. As was fairly common for the time, he came from a large family, having 5 brothers and 6 sisters. Growing up, they moved around the town several times, from Call Road to St Giles Terrace to Spring Road, Ringham Road, and Argyle Street. His early years would be spent attending St John's Church of England Primary and California School in the town of Ipswich. In November 1893, he had clearly decided that a life on the land was not for him, and began training to join the Merchant Navy, on board the former HMS Warspite, that was now a training ship being used by the Marine Society. He would remain here until February 1894, when seemingly having a change of heart, and decided to switch, enlisting in the Royal Navy on the 25th of February. At the age of 15, he would remain in the service for 15 years, until the 21st of April 1908. During his time there, he served on HMS Pembroke and at the Torpedo Training School of HMS Vernon, finishing his career with the rank of Petty Officer. Now back in civilian life, Arthur wasted no time in returning to Ipswich and starting a family, marrying 18-year-old Edith Muriel Everett on the 6th of December 1908. He found employment as an engine fitter's assistant in the engineering firm Ransom, Sims and Jeffries Limited, near the River Orwell, where he worked on agricultural machinery, and soon had a growing family of his own, with his first child Thomas being born in 1909 and their second Edward in 1912. As was popular at the time, Arthur joined the Territorial Army as a member of the 3rd Reserve Battalion of the Suffolk Regiment. Although a military unit with training and regular parade nights, it was often seen as more of a kind of social club than a real key in the defence of the nation. The phrase, "Thank heavens we've got a navy," was often used when talking about them, but as long as peace held, it was a good place for men like Arthur to show their patriotic nature. But peace was not to last for Arthur, or for millions of others. The summer of 1914 brought war, thought by many to be a very short one. It would be nothing of the kind. Britain's small pre-war army of around 80,000 was sent to France as the British Expeditionary Force in early August, and by the end of that month were a spent force. Forced from their positions around the town of Mons in a desperate retreat, battalions sacrificing themselves to allow their comrades to fall back, including men of the 2nd Battalion of the Suffolk Regiment at Lakato. But their story is for another day. New men and a new army were badly needed, and it would be men like Arthur who would answer the call. He enlisted fully into the army on the 19th of September 1914 for the duration of the war, marking his second real stint in uniform. He was sent to the 9th Service Battalion of the Suffolk Regiment, and, helped with his previous military experience, he was promoted to sergeant within a month. After training and organisation, he and the rest of the 9th sailed for France on the 30th of August 1915. Less than a month later, they would go into action, during the first British offensive of the war, attempting to push German forces from the mining town of Loos in France. The battle started on the 25th of September. 6 British infantry divisions were tasked with the capture of the land between Loos and the Labassie Canal. They were to break the German lines and allow 3 extra infantry divisions, as well as 3 cavalry ones, to push forward and into the open country beyond. The 25th also marked the first use of poison gas by British forces during the war, with mixed results. On the 26th of September, the Germans counterattacked, retaking ground taken the day before by the British. Desperate that it be brought back under their control, the 24th Division, that the 9th Suffolk were part of, were sent into the attack, supported by the 21st Division, who had seen heavy fighting the day before. The Suffolks were in the middle, between the 11th Essex and the 6th Cameron Highlanders, stepping off at 11:30 a.m. They soon found themselves under heavy fire, both from the front and from behind. British artillery started to fall short, landing among their own men. Sergeant Saunders took over the command of 2 machine guns and a few men after the officer commanding them had been badly wounded, and proceeded to give the Suffolk's neighbours, the 6th Battalion of the Cameron Highlanders, covering fire as they continued to make assault on the German positions at their front, with the ferocity that had become synonymous with Scottish regiments. Eventually, even this attack broke, forcing the Highlanders to retreat. Arthur was now alone, manning a Lewis gun. He was joined by an officer from the Camerons, Lieutenant Philip Christensen, and together they held off a fresh German attack of over 100 men. Arthur, firing the machine gun, was now doing all he could to buy time for the battalion survivors to reach the relative safety of the captured German trenches. Christensen later told of the experience. I saw the lines of the 24th Division moving forward and the Germans running back. The Suffolks came through where I was and seemed to be going well. Then they wavered, and to my horror I saw them and other troops on both sides of them doubling back and leaving me isolated again. But a stout fellow, Sergeant A.F. Saunders, refused to retire. He had a Lewis gun he had picked up with a full drum on it. He crawled over to me and said he'd stay and fight. He made to crawl over to the next shell hole, and as he did so, a shell landed and blew part of his left leg off above the knee. I crawled over and got him into the shell hole, putting a tourniquet on his leg and giving him my water bottle. His was empty. I crawled back to my hole, and a few minutes later, on looking over the top, I saw a fresh wave of Germans advancing. I was wondering what to do, whether to lie doggo or open fire. There seemed no point in opening fire, as there was perhaps 150 enemy advancing rather diagonally across our front. To my amazement, I heard short, sharp bursts of Lewis gun fire coming from the shell hole to my right. It was Sergeant Saunders, more or less minus a leg. The Germans were taken by surprise and bunched up. So I joined in, and between us we took a heavy toll, and the rest retired out of sight. I took down Sergeant Saunders' number, name, and regiment. Stretcher bearers from the Royal Engineers got me and Sergeant Saunders onto stretchers, but shell dropped close and we were abandoned. We were lucky. A stretcher bearer party from the Scots Guards picked us up and got us to an advanced dressing station. Lieutenant Christensen won the Military Cross that day. As for Sergeant Saunders, his bravery saw him awarded the Victoria Cross, the first ever to a member of the Suffolk Regiment, gazetted on the 30th of March 1916. For conspicuous bravery, when his officer had been wounded in the attack, he took charge of 2 machine guns and a few men, and although severely wounded in the thigh, closely followed the last 4 charges of another battalion, and rendered every possible support. Later, when the remains of the battalion, which he had been supporting, had been forced to retire, he stuck to one of his guns, continuing to give clear orders, and, by continuous firing, did his best to cover the retirement. His leg wound would lead to the end of his war. After spending months in several hospitals across the country, his leg was saved, but never fully healed. In fact, it became 3 inches shorter than the other leg due to the procedures, forcing him to wear a medical boot to aid in his walking, and it would trouble him for the rest of his life. Like others we have discussed on this channel, men like Sidney Day, himself also in the Suffolk Regiment in the First World War, but in the 11th Battalion, and much like Sergeant Saunders, wounded at Loos, and would go on to win his Victoria Cross later in the war. Please follow the link on screen if you wish to see this presentation. He received a hero's welcome when he returned to his hometown of Ipswich on the 22nd of June 1916. Held at the town hall by the mayor and high-ranking officers from his regiment, including his battalion's commander, Lieutenant Colonel Brentel. Members of the Suffolk Regiment and civilians from the town had also held a collection for him, raising the sum of £365, £22,197.62 today, that he and Edith used to buy a house on Foxhall Road, as well as a gold watch that was presented to him from the workers at Ransoms. Just 5 days after his hometown reception, he was in London, being presented his Victoria Cross by King George V at Buckingham Palace. His was the 665th VC to be awarded since its creation in 1857. But with his leg still in a bad way and showing no signs of recovery, his time in the army came to an end, being discharged on the 13th of November 1916, given a Silver War badge to denote that he had served his country, in case he was mistaken for someone who was shirking their duty and branded a coward. Back in the civilian world once again, he returned to Ransom's engineering. His wartime deeds would keep him at the centre of town life for many years, being granted the freedom of the borough of Ipswich in April 1920 and being appointed as a Justice of the Peace in 1923. In his personal life, his family would grow again with the birth of his third child, this time a daughter named Nina, in 1923. Despite it being earned while in army uniform, his Victoria Cross also made him the guest of honour at a Royal Navy event. When the Prince of Wales visited the training location he had been as a boy, he was introduced to him as a former sailor who had learnt his trade there. It would be the first of 2 times the pair would meet, with Arthur being chosen to be part of the Guard of Honour during the Prince's visit to a royal show on the 4th of July 1934. As the 1930s became the 1940s, Britain once again found itself in war, and Arthur, like many men who had done their bit in the Great War, were eager to serve their country again however they could. He found himself in uniform for the 3rd time, as a member of the 11th Suffolk Home Guard, serving as a quartermaster sergeant from 1940 until the Home Guard's disbandment in 1944. The most telling honour came in what would be the final months of his life. He was invited north to Glasgow in Scotland by now Lieutenant General Philip Christensen to attend a gathering of men from the 6th Battalion of the Cameron Highlanders who had fought at Loos, the very same men whose Arthur's heroics had saved that day many years ago. In recognition for what he had done, they made him an honorary member of the battalion. Sadly, Arthur's health soon began to fail him. He passed away on the 30th of July, 1947, of acute retention of urine and prosthetic hyplastia in Ipswich Hospital, aged 69. He was cremated and his ashes scattered in the Garden of Rest in Ipswich Cemetery. He is also commemorated on panel 64 of the Temple of Remembrance at Ipswich Crematorium. His medals, the Victoria Cross, the 1914-15 Star, the British War Medal 1914-1920, the Victory Medal 1914-1919, the Defence Medal 1939-1945, and the King George VI Coronation Medal were looked after by Edith's widow until 1989, when she now, aged 99, gifted them to the Suffolk Regiment Museum at Gibraltar Barracks and Rigsby Gate Street in Bury St Edmunds, without charge, despite knowing the price she could have got for them, as her and Arthur's son Edward explained. Mother is well aware how much the Victoria Cross could be worth if it were sold. The last one that went up for sale fetched £90,000. To sell this one would be like twisting a bayonet in my late father's back. There's no way Mother would ever have sold it. The medals given to the museum are now on public display there. He is also remembered by a blue plaque at 180 Corwell Hall Road, where he had lived, as well as by a memorial paving slab in Christchurch Park in Ipswich. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. All of the information and pictures used can be found in the description below. Please feel free to like and subscribe if you wish. This was Arthur Saunders, Ipswich's Victoria Cross hero, and this was a little bit of history.